Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the HR Congress podcast. My name is Ben Churchhouse, and today I'm joined by Ingrid Eras-Magdalena. Ingrid is the Executive Vice President / CHRO, I believe that's the correct job title, at Belmont, based in London. And in this role, she is responsible for overseeing HR, learning and development, and CSR activities for the entire organization. Ingrid has a wealth of experience in HR, operations, organizational learning and design, mergers, and acquisitions. She's worked in a variety of countries and a variety of organizations in multiple industries, but most notably in hospitality, including time with Le Méridien, Sheraton, and Starwood. So Ingrid was a former speaker of ours at the HR Congress in previous editions and was supposed to be speaking in Nice in November last year, but unfortunately she wasn't able to join us. So she was instead replaced by Doris, one of your, I believe, your colleagues. From what I've heard, the feedback was good from those sessions. But just in your absence, we were supposed to do an interview on site. So it's great that you could join me now after the fact, and we can go over some of those questions. So thank you, Ingrid, for joining me. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, and yeah, great to catch up.
Wow, what an introduction. So, and I'm very impressed how you pronounced my last name, because many people are struggling with that. So well done for that.
I do try. I don't always get it right. In fact, many occasions I don't. But yeah, I like to try and do that. It's a small thing, but it helps.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's sort of one of those sort of weird things that over time you get sometimes better at understanding all the cultural differences and the linguistic differences. But yeah, don't pretend to be an expert. I try.
Also, just to say that, I want to apologize once again for not being in Nice. It was unfortunately a last-minute business issue, and Doris is indeed my colleague. She works in my team, and she's amazing. So I was very, very happy that she was so flexible to literally get 2 days notice and to jump up and deliver the session. So a big thank goes to her.
Yeah, and thank you from me as well. It was great to have Doris there. She was a pleasure to have on site, and obviously coming on late notice is always a tough deal. But she dealt with it very professionally, and I was impressed with her on site. So thank you again to Doris. It was great to have her there. So I wanted to ask you some questions based on roughly the topics that you were going to be presenting at the event, just to get your perspective on them, to hear your experiences and thoughts. So the first question is something that's come up in your session, and I believe it was going to be one of the major points of one of your talks, which is the emergence of emotional intelligence and resilience, or EQ and AQ. Could you please explain more about how these ideas are actually practically applied in organizations?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a great question, and I think it's a bit unfortunate that they become buzzwords, because these are, I would say, these skills are becoming a necessity in not only in the business world, but also in general in people's lives. I believe that it is incredibly important in organizations to have a view on developing emotional intelligence skills and resilience skills for people, because the only one constant, as we all know, in our lives is change, and change is going at such an incredible speed nowadays with everything that's in place, that it is a necessity for human beings, for individuals, to be able to, one, cope with that, and that is where the resilience is coming in. Because with change, there is positive and negative change, and we all need to learn to bounce back from things that go wrong, and try to live an as stress-free life as possible. All the people are always, when you ask them the question, how are you? Most people are saying, I'm so busy. And in a way, that's a shame, because we only get a shot at it once, as far as we know, and we should be making the most out of it, but do this with a lot of pleasure as well. So in businesses, yes, incredibly important. We integrate the emotional intelligence as one of our leadership competencies, and actually assess our senior leaders on it, and also help them develop the skills in it. And sometimes when people ask me and say, look, where is this coming from? Because 10, 15 years ago, emotional intelligence was not so important. And they've got a point. Because if you look at how leadership has changed over the last, let's say, 50 to 60 years, or even a bit further back, there's been an incredible move from the tough, ruthless, hierarchic leaders. Where if you think about the battlefields, these were always strong men in big suits, in those wonderful armor, when sitting on a horse, and those were the leaders then, and that moved to in the industrial age mainly into more. A leader was someone who had great skills and abilities and experience, and their knowledge was their power, and it didn't matter how they treated their people. They were kind of on a pedestal because of what they knew and the position they had reached, and that has moved significantly over the last, let's say, 15 years that started, where the necessity as a leader to be much more collaborative and inclusive and empathetic and work with your teams has grown. And that is because we have different generations now. So I believe in an organization, it is a necessity to have not only your leaders, but actually to have a real focus across the organization on emotional intelligence, but also on the resilience. Otherwise, like in life, things don't work. So, that is why I believe they are so incredibly important in organizations. And with us, it is very, very clear in our core values, it's clear in our leadership competencies, and it's clear in all the learning and development we do. And perhaps one last thing to say to that is, it's also clear in the culture we have, and the culture is instilled from the top. And we've had quite a few changes in our organization in the last, let's say, 5 to 6 years. And one of the most important things for us was to change the culture and make sure it's a culture whereby everybody's got their feet on the ground. Everybody knows we're there for the same purpose, and we all have a role to play. And if we do that all together and support each other and work collaboratively, we can achieve our objectives and targets much easier than when there is multiple layers in the organization and departments not working together. So it's something that is totally ingrained in our organization, and frankly, I believe it has to be in any organization.
My follow-up question was really about how do you actually measure the change that changes to emotional intelligence and resilience have for the organization's results?
Very good question. Look, the measurement of training is always difficult, but there is definitely a lot of KPIs, a lot of key performance indicators that any business has. So if you look at things like your turnover or your stability index, if you look at your employee engagement percentages, if you look at your qualitative scores, like we use LQA, which really compares our organization with other luxury hospitality companies. If you look at your net promoter score, if you look at your EBITDA and your revenues, those are all key performance indicators that tell you something about how the organization is doing. And I think not only increases or decreases are not only related to the importance of EQ and AQ, but there is definitely a very high correlation to the organizational climate, so the culture that you have. And there are some studies that even say that nearly 1/3 of your financial performance is linked to your organizational climate. And your organizational climate is determined by the people who work there. So the better the climate and the more collaborative and people feel good at work. Because we spend more time at work than we do at home on a daily basis, and especially in the hospitality industry. We spend a lot of time there, and we are together, and we work very, very closely together. It's incredibly important that people feel good when they are at work. And we've seriously seen a move in our revenues upwards. we've seen a significant increase in our EBITDA, which is our bottom line profit, how we measure it at Belmont. We have seen stability and increases in stability in our engagement scores. As an organization, we're on a net promoter score of about 80%. That's incredibly high. And we are always a number one or number two in the quality assessments that we do. So, there is something in our organization that has become consistent and consistently going up because of, I believe, the way that we all treat each other and work together. So I think those are the kind of measurements that any organization can look at. At the moment you start focusing on your culture and the way that people feel in your organization, you will see these numbers go up. When I see in a property or in one of our businesses, the revenues and the EBITDAs go down significantly, I usually go there and speak to the management team and find out what's happening, because that is clearly, in a large proportion of cases, the cause of the issue. So I think there are clear numbers and clear KPIs that can show you the importance of having a good culture in place. And a good culture, to me, is linked one-on-one with EQ and AQ.
So I want to touch a little bit further on the point of resilience. What does being a resilient organization mean to you at Belmont? I guess, how does the organizational culture and the environment at work contribute to resilience, and what can employees do themselves personally to contribute to a resilient workplace for themselves and for everyone else?
I mean, let's just break it down in very simple steps. What is resilience? Resilience is really the ability to bounce back in the face of adversity. That's what it is. And as an organization, there's, especially as a hospitality organization, many things can go wrong. To take a very negative example, if something would happen in air travel, there would be a couple of unfortunate accidents in air travel, people stop traveling. That is the immediate reaction. And if people stop traveling, that would mean a significant reduction in revenue in our properties. And that will create a situation where we as an organization need to look at it and say, okay, how are we going to bounce back from this? How resilient are we? And how are we going to do that without too much cost to the individuals who work for us and too much cost to the company? So, and perhaps an example that is good for us to use is thinking about the hurricanes recently. So 2 years ago, we had the hurricanes in the Caribbean, but they also always hit our property in Charleston. So the properties in the Caribbean were literally destroyed, and not 100%, but significant damage. And then you have then a choice. What do you do? What is your next step? How do you deal with that? And the same in Charleston, in South Carolina. We had to close the property down for a period of time because we couldn't receive any guests, and that's a significant impact on our bottom line. We own all our properties, meaning that if we don't make revenues and we don't make profits, that's a significant hit to the company's bottom line. And then you can react in all kinds of ways. In some companies, what they do, the moment the revenues go down, they start terminating people. They try to cut their costs because, as I'm sure you're aware, that the biggest cost in hospitality is your employees. They are on average, let's say, depending on the organization, but between 25 and 35, 37% of your revenues. And that's a lot. That's 1/3 or more of your revenue. So that is the first step that usually we tend to take in hospitality. Now, we don't want to do that. We don't do that. So whenever we have in our business something that happens to us, we will try to find ways to deal with that situation and to be resilient, but do that at as little cost to our employees as possible. And then we'll find different ways to cut costs, but that doesn't hurt anybody internally. So for an organization, that is what I would say, an example of how you can be resilient. For the employees, very similar. When situations like this arise, it's not easy for them because many of them also live on a service charge. And that will have an impact on how much money they have on a monthly basis to spend. So for them, it's also a very difficult situation. So what we do then is we try to help them. We try to give them information on finances. How do you deal with situations like this? Everybody's there to support each other. And people generally just reach out to each other and help each other. So in that is perhaps an example as to how in our business we deal with adversity and how we bounce back from it.
So I want to move on now to the second part of your presentation schedule at the HR Congress, which was going to be the masterclass, pre-Congress workshop on how do you succeed with any type of boss. What are some of the key practices or messages that you've learned in your time, and what do they look like?
Okay, well, it's an interesting one. I believe, and I've had a multitude of different bosses, and of course, it was interesting when I was giving Doris the prep for the session. How she, of course, was going to use examples which were about me. So that was very interesting to hear. So how do you succeed with any type of boss? I mean, first of all, I think it is important to realize that what are you there for? What is your role in an organization? And your role is to make the organization shine. And that means make your boss shine. So I think it's incredibly important to succeed with any type of boss is to really try to understand what is it that your direct leader, your direct manager is responsible for. So what are his or her objectives? Then it is also important to understand their style. How do they want to be communicated with? How often do they want you to communicate? Do they prefer in person or in writing or an email or a phone call? That is important to understand. And then I think the third thing is important to understand is to know that the higher up you come in an organization, the less people you have that you can talk to. So being a senior leader in an organization is actually a lonely job. And that is also something that I believe as an employee you should be aware of, that your boss is a human being like you are. And sometimes it can be incredibly powerful when your boss understands that you understand that you see it as your job to develop yourself, because I think that's very important for each individual, but also to make sure that you are there to help your boss and therefore the company shine. And once you have that kind of an understanding in place, honestly, I believe that the relationship that you have with your boss, whatever type of boss it is, will be very, very strong. Now, I've had a multitude of different bosses that I worked for in my life, and very, very different approaches and very, very different ways of them dealing with me. But I've always come away having had the feeling that I had a constructive relationship with them. And they've taught me things that I think are really good to do as a boss, but they've also taught me things that I think are not good to do. And that's also a learning. So that is like, in a nutshell, I would say that's how you can work with any boss. Just realize you're there for them, understand what their objectives are, understand the way that they work, what's their style, what's their communication. And once you do, you can adapt yourself to them and therefore make yourself successful, but also them.
To follow on from that, in a similar sense, what advice would you give to those HR professionals, especially those who are aspiring to level up in the organization, who are looking to add greater value along the way? What would be your advice for them?
It's a very simple sentence, and I will give you a little story with it, and that is be willing to stick your neck out. And, the story that I always told our corporate trainees in this company, but also in my previous life, is nothing comes to you on a silver tray. It is when you want to achieve something and when you want to grow and get more responsibilities and grow in your role, ask for it and work towards it. So, I have never ever seen someone who performs well, who's willing to take on those extra jobs and who's willing to take on that project and either be a member or lead a project and not be successful. I've never seen it. And unfortunately, it's such a simple, I think, lesson, and not everybody really takes that opportunity. But those people that I have seen in my entire working life so far that were willing to raise their hand and say, listen, I'm willing to do this project, or I'm willing to help you with this, or I'm willing to stick my neck out, those always made it to a much higher level than where they're working at that moment in time. So it's really what you put in is what you get back. It is rare that people really stick their neck out and then don't make it to the next level. And if that happens, then you need to question the organization you're working for. Because of course, nothing's perfect, and there might be organizations where it doesn't work that way. But in general, it really does. And I can give you multiple examples in my life of people who did that and who are actually doing really, really well. So it's really in the hands of the individual. If you want to, there's plenty of opportunities. And maybe to add to that, one thing is there were I've spoken to some young trainees and or young colleagues or people who didn't know what to do. And I always said to them, look around you in the room. Every single thing that you see in this room has been made by a company. So the paper clip, the piece of paper, your laptop, the mouse, everything has been made by a company. And that company has a structure. So in that company, you have your operational persons, you have your supervisor, you have your manager, you have an HR department, sales and marketing department, IT, in every company. So there is so many jobs and opportunities in life that it is nearly impossible that you don't find the thing that you want to find, and that you can't make a career if you really want to make a career. You can. And that faith is in your hands, as far as I'm concerned. And you just need to make sure that you find the organization where you feel good, where you are aligned with the culture and the values, and you will do well. It's it might sound a bit dreamy, but honestly, that's what I've seen so far in my life. So I do believe that that's how it works.
I don't think it sounds too dreamy. I mean, the maxim is pretty simple. It's like if you're going to put the hard work in and you mix that with the right opportunities and the right organization, or whether it's not even within an organization, if you're going out by yourself, it's really simple. I mean, you're not always going to succeed, and I think failure is an important part of the growth process. But look, I mean, if you're putting in the right type of work, it's going to happen at some point. I think that's a pretty good way to finish. Thank you, Ingrid, for joining me. It's always great to speak with you, and I always enjoy the conversations. Is there any way that people can get in touch with you if they want to reach out, if they have any questions, or they want to connect with you or anything like that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if they wish to, I'm on LinkedIn, so that's perhaps the easiest way to do so. So they can just look me up with my name, so Ingrid.Eras-Magdalena, and happy to hear from anybody if they want to. So no problem.